Go ahead.
All right, awesome. So my name's Jeff Hogue, and we're here to talk about single sign-on. This is the 2020 version of the New York State statewide Civil Legal Aid Technology Conference, with the in conjunction with the Permanent Access to Justice Commission in New York and NICE Tech. And so I'm work for LegalServer now. I was a legal aid lawyer for a long time, and have become more and more of a technologist as we go, and now I'm working inside of a technology company. But single sign-on is something that we love for folks to know more about and think about as they rely more and more on a variety of technology tools. And we're going to talk a little bit about what it is, and then we're going to open up the floor to questions. So I'll turn it over to Mike Donnelly.
Hi, I'm Mike Donnelly. Jasmine, nice to see you. So I've been with Simpson Thacher and Bartlett for about 16 years as CIO. Been working in law firm technology since about 1995. I was with Deloitte and been with a couple law firms and have settled in at Simpson. I became involved in this whole process several years ago when a partner at our firm said that I should try to reach out to what is now the Permanent Commission on Access to Justice. Back then it was called the Task Force, to provide some technology assistance to the cities and the state's civil legal services providers. And I didn't really know what that all meant, but I did my best to learn. I rallied some of my peers at other firms, got to meet people like Jeff Hogue. And we did that. We provided some assistance to those providers, things like helping with policies and procedures, helping to acquire equipment, helping to make recommendations for different types of software, or how to maybe make a recommendation, which oftentimes meant I think you should take all the stuff that's sitting in a network closet with servers that are getting older and put it in the cloud. So it's been a great experience. I've gotten to meet a lot of really nice people. This is, I think, my third tech conference. I think I had to miss last year's because of a conflict. First virtual one, but I'm really glad to be involved. I think that I'll try to introduce the topic. So single sign-on is really a way of just using identity and access management. It's an element of that, to be able to provide a single means of getting access to web-based, SaaS, any type of hosted application that your users need access to. And so you're using tools on the back end to integrate with your Active Directory, let's say, with usually the connection point is something called SAML or something similar to SAML, and you use a tool, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, to be able to, so the users only have to enter in basically their network user ID and password. On the back end, dual factor authentication is occurring with one of the tools, and we'll give you a little poll question here to see if you're familiar with this. But certainly a good example of LegalServer, right, Jeff? I mean, that's getting, because of the confidentiality of the data in there, and that's what this comes down to, is you're trying to protect the application of the users that need access to, give them the seamless access to it. Again, that single sign-on. People don't have to worry about remembering separate passwords for these applications. Reduces costs to the help desk. If something goes wrong, you have logging on the system, so you can figure out why this person a problem. And another advantage is someone moves on to another organization, you don't have to worry about the fact, do we make them take them off that application? Do we disable their account? Now you're because they left your organization, you've hopefully disabled their account within your organization, so therefore access to all the other applications via single sign-on are also disabled. So Jeff, do you have any things you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think so. SaaS being software as a service, I think that's what you just named is one of the strongest arguments in favor of single sign-on is that we have so many different tools now that people use. LegalServer is something that it's software as a service. It's online. It's a separate website. It's not inside the walled garden of any particular organization. And boy, if you add all those up from document management systems to your Office suite to Westlaw and Lexis and all of them actually, you don't really want anybody to know what you were searching for. You don't want to know what you put on a calendar. And so when someone does leave, and it turns out, as you well know, Mike, being in this field for a long time, I think it's still the highest incidence of data leaving your walled garden for bad purposes is somebody who works for inside the group. So they take for nefarious purposes, they take it out or they leak it really negligently on purpose. And so the truth is we need to turn people off all the places we need to turn them off and do it in a hurry. And that is a really, really nice thing about single sign-on. Technically, if you dig into it, right? If there's any super nerds out there, we know single sign-on and single sign-off aren't necessarily the same thing. But for legal aid providers, this is how you would typically use it: is you log in using this external credential, and once you turn that off, the ability to log in is no longer there. So yeah, anything else on the background of single sign-on you wanted to cover, Mike, or shall I? Are you passing the ball?
Yeah, I pass the ball, and I guess we can do our poll, right?
Yeah. So, one of the things I want to point out is that single sign-on is mildly it's not super controversial. The dissenting view is you're giving people the keys to the castle, and that's too much power to have in one login. And let's. The poll is up, Jasmine, and anybody else who shows up, feel free to fill out that poll. I'm going to share my screen for just a moment. I'm sure that neither Slack nor Google will mind that I just showed their stuff for a second. Do you see my screen right now?
Yeah.
Right. So let's say you use Slack and you also use G Suite and you have a Google identity. This is one way that you can get into Slack is instead of filling in all your information, you can click continue with Google. And now there's a whole bunch of different platforms that do that. So Google has its own, as you saw just there, that's one way to do it. And then on the back end, you can use systems just like that to present a button like that to sign in with Google. Of course, Microsoft has it. I think it's almost exclusively through their Azure AD platform.
That's right. Yeah.
And and then there's one that Michael and I both seem to have some fondness for, which is Okta, OKTA. One of the reasons that I recommend Okta often for people who are Microsoft shops is that our good friends on the West Coast change stuff all the time. And it's really I find Microsoft's guidance very difficult to read. They've gotten better. So Kevin, you're probably young enough you don't remember, but back in about 2001, reading any Microsoft documentation was like, you needed a quiet room and 5 dictionaries because they wrote it on like plain language day, but in reverse. And so it's really Okta's problem to connect into Microsoft. So you don't have to worry about what these big platforms have done. A platform like Okta, this is what they do, and they're not the only ones. I think Michael, you had a couple others that you wanted to.
Yeah, we use Duo at Simpson. Certainly very familiar with Okta, and so those are two very good ones. RMS is another good one. There are a number of offerings out there. All have little, their own advantages and disadvantages, but they're all pretty good tools.
Is Duo its own thing, or is it is it a child company of one of the big daddies, or
Actually, I forget now. I think it has been. Take a quick look.
I'm thinking there was one called Authy, and I think Authy got bought by Twilio. But so the major platforms have something like this. Usually, that's their own product, and then there's a few companies out there who this is what they do is single sign-on. And yeah, what'd you find out?
Oh, they were acquired by some small company called Cisco.
I thought so. I thought maybe there was Cisco. Yeah, because that's right. I think we actually had a client who wanted to do that. Um, yeah, and so using, I guess, us as an example, we support several of these flavors, but if a lot of them are built around similar technology, like you said, SAML or OpenID Connect is actually you get into a bunch of jargon that doesn't really matter. What really matters is that whatever platform that you're using, just find out what they support. And then when you pick yours, see if it will is compatible with your various platforms. Although many, if they're small enough like us that they'll actually, you can talk to somebody who works there. Most of us are open to connecting to more providers. So if Mr. Donnelly decided he was done doing what he's doing and wanted to create a really awesome single sign-on company, and it used the industry standards for this, we'd be willing to look. And I think a lot of companies are fine with any reputable company that wants to help manage this. So
what just our experience has been, because we've done a number of these now, is that sometimes the company that you reach out to, whoever the application provider is, they're like, oh sure, no problem. And others, like, there's no big advantage to them, right? They're not going to get you and not going to provide you any better service as far as application goes. So they have no skin in the game, so to speak. But so you usually don't get pushback, but because at this point it's become a very common thing to do. It's every now and then you do, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't continue to pursue it. Sounds like LegalServer is something that for example, that they're doing as a matter of course, right?
yes, and one of the reasons what I want to get to, so whoever watches this in the future for posterity, and pretty soon we'll be talking to somebody who's got a specific use case. I think one of the biggest advantages for us is that these companies are working on multi-factor authentication and really fancy multi-factor authentication. So if for single sign-on is having kind of a single key that unlocks many doors, multi-factor authentication makes that key really hard to steal. And so we'll keep, our little company, we'll keep building working on ways to help things be secure. But, I assume somewhere in a building, Okta and G Suite and Microsoft and Duo have engineers who are doing nothing but like dreaming about what the future uncrackable, super safe way is to prove that you are who you are. Retina scans. It's become really. I think I'm going to just bet that the wave of the future. This is not actually a RSA key, but I actually think the little keys that you carry around and plug into a computer are going to get more common, especially people who aren't so good at adopting new technology.
Mm-hmm.
And in legal aid programs, they don't issue people cell phones. And in legal aid programs in general, there's a lot of folks who are, the salaries are not gigantic. So telling somebody you're going to have to use this phone for work, it may not be super popular. And so there's these keys that you can have where you plug it in wherever you are in the world. I think those are going to be more common. And we don't know what tomorrow's super amazing technology is going to be that's going to help you prove that you're really Mike Donnelly or Jeff Hogue. And so an advantage that we see with people using single sign-on is that these companies have a vested interest in making sure that they're developing the fanciest ways to prove that you are who you are. And so that's a real big advantage is we're developing our own multi-factor, but there'll never be a day when I think, oh gosh, you went with some other big company instead of using our built-in thing, because these people better be the best on the planet at it, I'd say. What do you think, Mike?
I think you make a good point, and I think I think this is going to be basically the de facto standard going forward.
Yeah, it's coming. I mean, if I were if I were an insurer, if I worked for an insurance company that, protected you against breaches and stuff, I'd say, like, tell me about your plan for how you're going to
Yeah.
deal with these things. That said, just to go back before we get hyper specific here with Jasmine, um, the naysayers would say, I want my workers, I want really granular permissions all over the place. I don't care that they've got to sign in. But interestingly enough, when you talk to people who are like, I don't want single sign on, I want them to sign in separately, then what I say is, okay, so what do you think your workers are going to do when they've got 7 different places to log into? I know, because I've been in the offices, they write it down on a piece of paper, it's on sticky notes under the keyboard.
Exactly.
So then the response is, oh no, we have them use a password manager. which
Hmm.
is which is great, but guess what a password manager is? It's really one place that stores a bunch of keys, and then you have to make really sure that you're extra secure there. So one way or another, I think this is kind of where folks are destined. Although it is really important with single sign-on to enforce complex passwords and probably multi-factor. So
Yeah, that's a good point. The other thing is that, so if people like the naysayers, like you were saying, insist on not using it, although in our case you don't have a choice. Well, let's say you give them a choice, so that typically that user will use the same password for all 7 services.
right,
So
right.
if a hacker finds one, then they can start getting keys to the other ones.
Right. And something that I do use a password manager, but I use Bitwarden for some of my stuff, and
Hmm.
they have a little service that says check to see if your password has been compromised. Which is,
Hmm.
and I thought, well, that sounds like a security hole in itself, but it's interesting but they will look to see if a password. Let's say you're going to throw it away, even that's probably the only way I do it, because it still creeps me out. But you may find that your clever password has actually been in a database that's been cracked and hacked and cracked somewhere. And if you use that in multiple places, you're out of luck. And the more recent guidance is don't change your passwords all the time for all of these reasons. NIST, NIST, is a organization that comes out with some standards, so it's worth checking out what they have to say. All right, so I hope anybody who's tuned in to learn more about single sign-on has gotten a pretty good overview. Anything on the overview that we missed, you think, Mike?
I don't think so. I think we got it all according to what I wrote down the other day.
Okay, so the steps to just getting single sign-on working in general are: look at all the software that your workers log into, and you really have to scratch your head for a minute. I bet there's more than you think. All
Hmm.
the things that they might use for work. Of course, make sure that you actually have work accounts for those, and then find out what standards, which single sign-on providers that they can integrate with. Um, it's probably all of the big ones that we've named will probably work with all of your software tools, but you need to check. And then typically there'll be a fee somewhere. There'll be some money paid either. So Okta, you sign up with them as a service, and then you can test it internally. So you can put just some users typically on your single sign-on service and give it a test run. And then you probably have to do change management internally and talk to your users about the why, so everybody understands we're protecting our client's interest. And if that doesn't get them, tell them we're protecting your job, because if we have to do data breach notifications to everybody in our database, like somebody, we're gonna have budgetary problems. And then you can train people on how to use it. And doesn't take too long, I don't think, anymore for people to get it. The other nice thing is, with I don't know what duos, what your firm may have very short cycles, but it's usually is adjustable how long the sort of sign-on tokens last.
Mm.
So you may not be challenged, let's say, to put in more factors of authentication every single time you use a computer, or you may, depending on how tight that's dialed in. All right. So Jasmine, I think we can unmute you safely. Uh, looks like you're about to use single sign-on. Is that right?
That's right. So this is my portion of the presentation, and I have
It
no,
is.
no, I'm just joking. I said I really have to pay attention. I have good questions now.
No problem.
I guess just some feedback. I pulled up Okta's website, and it looks so user friendly. With Azure, I'm not sure. I don't have access or administrative access to it since I'm not the IT person, but I usually am heavily involved with the project management portion of implementing these kind of technology projects, if we want to call it that. So I think
Yeah.
that between you and Michael, you really did fill in some of the gaps in my understanding of SSO and the steps to implement it. I know that there's a little bit more on the back end for IT person, but I think that he's very well equipped and had some suggestions for us. I can actually pull that up. I guess my only question, I think that, and I was scratching my head and I was like, which software do our staff use? We do have Westlaw. Like I mentioned, we are in LegalServer as of this April that just passed. We are predominantly in Microsoft. We've implemented Teams. The only other software that I can think of is something called Paychecks, which is our HR. And I'm not
Yep.
sure what they're compatible with, but we can look into that. I thought that you guys made an amazing point with regard to people managing their passwords. We're still dealing with 1, 2, 3 ABCs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
Password one, password two.
Exactly. I think that LegalServer brought in a real need for single sign-on because you don't have the ability to change your password yourself. So we did see an increase, or a lot of increased activity in our help desk with people asking for passwords to be reset. So this would be very nice since I know that Office 365 does allow resets to happen. So if we're using that network password, it should be easy for them to reset their own passwords with the 2-factor authentication. Yeah, other than that, I mean, I think I'm clear. I have no questions. I don't know if you have any specific feedback around how to implement specifically for LegalServer or what that setup looks like.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Okay.
I did just check Paychecks. Okta, for instance, that's one I looked at. Okta says they're Okta verified, so it works with Paychecks. And you'll probably even find some more. But that I will talk about that integration. But that example reminded me that people can end up with different levels of power and different tools, which is totally fine. So over in your HR suite, even just because you can get in there doesn't mean you can do anything. You may be an administrator in LegalServer and a low-level user in the HR suite. So just I'm imagine, yeah. To be clear, just because you're an administrator in one place doesn't mean you're an administrator in other places, which is to be expected. But occasionally we run into that misconception that if you have a certain level of power, that you have that same power across tools, which is not the case. And you said, I believe you all are using Microsoft. You're currently using Active Directory. So an initial choice that you'll face is whether you want. So you could use Microsoft's built-in tool, and they have a single sign-on service that and you could say that's what it's based on, and spin that up, and then you're off to the races. And so then you would go and see if anybody had used whatever their tool is called. I can't think of, it's in Active Directory, but I can't think of what their single sign-on bits are, to connect to your various tools like Paychecks, and then LegalServer, we support it. Or you look at something like Duo or Okta, and so the difference is then you're asking these other tools to connect to Microsoft rather than using Microsoft's built-in single sign-on thing to connect to the outside world. So yeah, that's exactly what. And you may decide as an entity like, well, we're already paying for this other Microsoft stuff, and we can get a discounted rate to get to the level where we can use it as our single sign-on provider. Or you may decide that it's for the ease of use to go ahead and pay for a separate service. So that's a really good example of where your organization would be at, Jasmine, and deciding, who's your key maker going to be. Does that make sense, Jasmine?
It actually does. And I think that, and this is why when I looked at Okta, I was like, I like this, just because we don't have an in-house IT person or team.
Oh,
Yeah. So our Adam, his name is Adam, comes in, whenever needed. But I think that what we have found most useful is when we can, troubleshoot or access and make changes, obviously with guidance. So I like how this one kind of works. I like that there's no behind the scenes coding or anything crazy looking that
yes.
I'm like looking at it and I'm amazed. I'm like, we could just list everything and move it around.
Oh yeah. No,
So
if you don't have in-house IT, I think I'd strongly look at Duo or Okta or one of the others. And we don't own stock in any of these, or at least I don't. Maybe Michael does.
and I've actually used Duo.
Okay.
NYU uses Duo, and so
Okay.
to access any of that stuff, and it's a positive experience with that. And then I actually use for my two-factor authentication with Microsoft, I use their authenticator.
Mm-hmm.
Also with my Adobe like license that I have, I also use the authenticator, which it allows you to use. So we're like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, but all of our staff isn't. Those who are involved with the technology, I'm a little more adventurous. So I
Mm-hmm.
try things without. Probably Adam looks at my account and is like, "What is this girl doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, but I thought that I was." I think that the organization is moving in the right direction. We are actually utilizing Intunes through Microsoft to manage our mobile policies, and have recently introduced pins so that if someone is, because since it's so popular for people to have their personal devices linked to work tools, we thought it was super important for us to safeguard our data. And so we've implemented a couple of policies like copying text out of your Outlook and pasting it elsewhere on a personal device. So we're really trying to lock it down. And I think that my executive director will definitely be excited once this is up and running, because I do think that it safeguards our data even more. And I think it'll make Adam, our IT guy, happy, because he's been talking about this for years.
Yes, and the mobile device management stuff, it's pretty important, including just little things like telling people if they're going to access work stuff, they have to have a password on their phone, and all of that's gotten much easier. I think I'm an Android person, and having a separate work profile on my phone is trivial, super easy now. It was really hard, 5 or 6 years ago when I first did it. Now it's easy. And we've even tested it where I'm like, okay, I'm going to wipe your phone. I got permission. Like, I'm going to wipe your phone.
Right.
But it only wipes the work profile stuff.
Right.
And it was a real concern for users in the organization that members of our IT will have of the small team. And again, it's a crossover. So we wear multiple hats so
Right.
that, that they wouldn't wipe someone's entire cell phone by mistake. So what we introduced was MAM, and we're definitely managing applications rather than people's entire devices.
Yes.
So I mean, the fact that people are okay with that and no complaints thus far, I think that this is definitely the next step, SSO, and I think they'll be happy when we do implement this.
So Jasmine,
Great.
you pretty positive experience with Intune then on your mobile devices?
Yes, so far, I think we were using, I am trying to remember the name of the other program, and we did not have we were paying for something through IBM, and I cannot remember the name of their mobile device management.
MAS 360?
Yes, Mass 360. And that was the first iteration of our mobile device management tool that we were using. And I don't know, I think it was a bit complicated for us to manage. Now I think that we're in the weeds and we know exactly what policies we want to implement. I think that again, it's difficult because like you guys had mentioned, we're not handing off mobile devices. There's such a large cost associated with that. On top of that, most people don't want another device. They have their own devices and they want to use them.
Right. Yeah.
So it was definitely easier to implement new policies that pins or whatever other policies are in place. People seem to welcome those ideas, knowing that no one was controlling their personal devices.
Yes, perfect. You also, once they have, so if you're using single sign-on, and of course using that, in doing that you leverage multi-factor, you still may end up using Okta or Duo, or any of these, as part of their multi-factor, may say, to prove who you are, you're going to have to do something with your phone as one of the choices. And then, so you may still use the same authenticator, because that's one way they do it, is by these codes that roll around on your authenticator device, which is, so I'm going to blow everybody's mind maybe, but like I use both. I have all the Microsoft Authenticator app does, and all the Google has one as well, is send you time limited codes, and then, but cool, in some way I don't quite understand, if you lose internet access, the codes will still keep getting generated on a per minute basis. So you can still use the app still gives you these codes, and for when you do multi-factor authentication, a lot of times one of the ways you can have a second thing that that proves that you have a thing that you have, which is all security lingo. um, they ask you for the code. So for LegalServer in particular, LegalServer is a case management system that's entirely web-based. You contact us. It sounds like you guys have already purchased the add-on to plug it in. And the awesome thing is, once it's turned on, there's a very simple screen. Matter of fact, I don't think I'm giving a commercial here. I think it's probably worth showing just how simple it is, to the very few things that you typically need to set up single sign-on once you have signed up with your service, right? So you found your, I'm going to call him the key maker. I kind of like that. Once you have decided who your single sign-on key maker is, then there's a pretty small number of things that you need to tell each piece of software that you plug into it to make all this work. So give me one moment and I will pull up an example configuration screen. That's all fake, not a real. No real data was harmed in the making of this video. I'm going to shrink it anyway, just so you can't see my full key here. Well, No, I can't, because there's one piece of information in there I don't want anybody to see, even though this site doesn't have any real sites on it. The only pieces of information that's required is we turn on a very simple admin interface, and all you have to do is pick which provider, so Okta, Google, Microsoft, whatever, and then your provider gives you a couple of pieces of information that you plug into the admin interface, and after that you're good to go. One thing that we do in LegalServer that you may have may happen with other platforms is we have a little button that has you check your system for whether you're ready for single sign-on. And what that does is check to make sure each user has a unique email address, because like many other platforms will do the same thing. One of the very few things that are unique about you that you don't mind sharing is your email address. So we don't want to put your social security number in. And so to use single sign-on in LegalServer, and I bet with other software as a service platforms, you probably need to have a unique username, or in our case, a unique email address, because really all it does is say, okay, you want to log in to LegalServer. We're gonna ask, let's say Microsoft, or I'm going to use G Suite as the example. We're going to ask G Suite if it's okay for you to log in. And before we even start this conversation, we're going to say, hey, G Suite, I've got somebody who's coming in with, JAM at abc.com, and she wants to get in. Is she somebody that you have records for? And by the way, here is my secret code that says that I have permission to ask you, G Suite, whether JAM at abc.com has permission. And then there's a little bit more back and forth, and it'll say, yes, she does. And so the thing that all that relies on is that there's something unique about you to align you with our list of people. And the way we do that is with a unique email address. So everybody's got to have a unique email address. And then how we handled, there's another interesting wrinkle, which is that you may have an email address that's at savetheworld.org or at onmicrosoft.com. You may have people with different email addresses, and so we give you the ability to decide whether, when you set this up, whether as a security measure you want to say, oh no, there's no such thing as somebody who works for us who has an email address that is anything but savetheworld.org, and therefore don't even try to have this conversation unless they have that as their email address. Or you may in your organization have more than one domain, so you have kind of the ability to do a little filtering there. And then finally you have some choices about other platforms probably do something similar. For us, what we said is you only have 3 choices. You can have it disabled, so you're not requiring single sign-on at all. People just like the old style login and password. You can have it enabled so that it's optional to do single sign-on, or you can have it enabled and required. So if you put it as enabled and required, then nobody will be able to get in to the system unless they use single sign-on. That helps you with what Michael and I were talking about before, where you have this, like, you have the power to exclude somebody permanently. They're gone, and now they're really, really gone. But merely enabled would let them get in either way. So if they knew their password, they could get in. What people typically do is enable single sign-on, but make it not required first while everybody gets used to it, and then you flip the switch. That makes sense, Jasmine? Boy, I talked a lot there in one stretch.
No, I think that's super helpful. And I think that it also gives a very descriptive view of what the testing phase would look like. And once like full implementation happens, what that looks like. So
Mhm.
I think that's pretty good.
Good.
We can also capture, I don't know if, so I guess, are there any notifications like generated when people fail the multi-factor authentication. And I know that you mentioned that logs are being recorded to, like, is that something that would only be accessible to the IT person, or how does that look, and how do you utilize that tool?
Good question. So for that's actually going to be over in your single sign-on, your key maker, your single sign-on provider. So if they failed multi-factor, so they've got to kind of already have that key in their hand. So if they came to a LegalServer and they tried to log in with multi-factor or with single sign-on, the very first thing it's going to do, if they are not already logged in, is make them go prove they are who they are in your, to go give them their magic key again. And when they go through the process of proving they are who they say they are, if they fail, that all those policies are set in your single sign-on provider. So I'll use Okta as an example. If you signed into you got your Okta key this morning, should be probably for the rest of the day, you can get into all of the tools that you need to get into with no additional logging in, because you're still carrying that key around. And if that key's expired and you can't get into the site, and then it says, wait just a second, I'll give you the key as soon as you prove who you are again, and you fail, then all those logs they're probably beautiful in these systems like Duo and Okta. I would imagine that's a question a lot of people ask. So my guess is they do a real good job of showing you access and when, for how long, and failures and that sort of thing.
I mean, and I think we encountered an issue some time ago where, our IT person actually noticed someone was like in Turkey and signed on to Microsoft, and they were like, wait, is one of your staff members visiting Turkey right now? I was like, no one's in Turkey. So, and you had also mentioned earlier in the presentation about how there are certain password keepers, or even the browsers. Now I noticed that Google is doing this for those folks who, save their passwords on the browser. There's actually an alert now saying like, hey, one of your passwords has been compromised. And these are all of the different sites where you have used that password. So it needs to be reset. And I thought that was kind of cool that, Google's doing that, and through Chrome. So I think that's a good idea, again, because some of the non-techie people might just save their LegalServer password onto the browser.
Right.
For very easy, logging in. Probably not our safest bet, but I've seen people do it.
Yes. Yeah. So we're thrilled. Go ahead, Michael.
No, I'm sorry. By the way, sorry, I cut in and out there a couple of times, but I was going to say, in terms of Duo, it has pretty good reporting. I'm sure Okta does too. It's been a while since I've looked at Okta. They're all pretty good at these things, but the reporting is such that, so for example, if I'm working remotely, I use Duo to sign on for dual factor authentication, right? So obviously it has multiple purposes. If I'm offline, if I'm not connected to our network, then I can use an offline code to get into my laptop, right? So now I'm into my laptop, I'm not connected yet. Now I establish my VPN connection across my home internet into our server, and then at 425 Lex, and now I'm authenticated. So what my point is that these tools will allow you to work offline or online, right? So people say, when we first started introducing these things, like I'm on a plane, there's no internet. Can you imagine? What do I do? So there's ways around this. And if your question was about reporting, the reporting is very good. So someone says that, I know I entered in the right code. I'm positive I did. And so we, of course, look in the logs, the network team does, and we can say, well, I don't think so. You couldn't have, and work with the user to obviously to help them through, what the problems are. Same thing applies to, when you're going through the single sign-on whole idea that we're talking about now into your web-based applications. They're saying, I definitely entered in the right password, but we can see clearly in the logs, like, incorrect password. Oftentimes it's that they recently changed their password. They might have signed into the network, the core network, with the right password, but then somehow forgot when they went into single sign-on for LegalServer, Office 365, where the case may be. So
There are a lot of ways of, the controls, reporting, management of these tools is very strong.
Great. Thank you, Michael. We're coming to the top of the hour. So in case any or security skeptics made it this far, there are some things you can do to lock things down even more. You can still use single sign-on and force people to go through a VPN, for instance, and say, well, we're going to do both. You can have single sign-on, but you can't access these things unless you're coming through our VPN, which would make it a lot harder for somebody to even try to beat on it from outside your approved network. So SSO is certainly compatible with a very high security system, and I hope that hope it goes well for you, Jasmine. Any last questions before we depart?
No, thank you very much for answering all of my questions and for the presentation. I think is very helpful, and I look forward to getting a copy of this recording so that I can share it with the rest of the team. But I appreciate it. Thank you.
We shall
I
do
hope
that.
I was a good student.
You were excellent. I can't wait.
Yes.
I mean, you're really good at summarizing what y'all are doing. So I'm figuring out we're going to rook you into doing one of these panels next year.
Oh,
There you go.
yeah. That might make people happy. I like this stuff.
Unpunished.
Thanks, Jasmine. Thank you,
Thank you
Kevin.
guys.
Thanks,
Have a
everyone.
great one. Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Bye, you guys. Bye-bye.